The German federal government has just put a new rental law package on the table. And this package could change housing in Germany in several very important areas. So in this video, I'll share which changes are planned and what they could mean, especially for you and me. And before we start, one important disclaimer. This reform has been approved by the federal cabinet, but it's not a final law yet. It still has to pass through the Bundestag and Bundesrat, and details can still change. Okay, so let's start with furnished apartments. This is where anyone who has ever searched for a flat in Berlin, Munich, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Cologne, Stuttgart, Düsseldorf, or honestly anywhere with a tram line and too many applicants starts developing facial twitches. The problem is not that furnished apartments exist. They can be very useful if you have just moved to Germany or do not want to buy a kitchen before you even know where the nearest supermarket is. Furnished housing can be a lifesaver. The problem is that furniture has often been used as a reason to charge much higher rents, while tenants had almost no idea how the furniture surcharge was calculated. 2 years ago, when I was actively searching for a new apartment, in one of the apartment viewings, the landlord was asking for 300 euros extra per month just for the kitchen. I know things cost money, but number one, it wasn't brand new. Number two, I could get the same furniture for under 2000 euros if I assembled everything myself, and the worst thing is that there was no end date for the 300 euros. Meaning that if I ended up living in that apartment for 5 years, the rent for just the kitchen equipment would have been more than 18,000 euros. And this situation is even worse in large cities. The draft wants to change that in tight housing markets. Landlords should have to show the furniture surcharge separately, without the tenant having to ask. And the surcharge should be based on the current value of the furniture, not the original purchase price. For fully furnished apartments, the draft mentions a simplified cap of 10% of the net cold rent for the furniture surcharge. And if the landlord does not provide information about the furniture surcharge, the apartment should be treated as unfurnished when calculating the rent. For tenants, this means more clarity and less room for hidden rent markups. For landlords, it means furnishing a flat is no longer a magical spell that turns a normal rent into whatever desperate applicants will tolerate. The next change is about temporary rentals. This connects directly to the furnished apartment issue. Under the current law, rentals for temporary use can sometimes be exempt from certain tenant protections, including the rent break. Instead of offering a normal rental contract, some landlords offer a temporary contract. 3 months, 6 months, maybe another 6 months. And because it's supposedly temporary, different rules may apply. The draft wants to close this loophole. Temporary use rental contracts should generally be limited to 6 months. A one-time extension of up to 8 months would be possible. If the limits are exceeded, normal tenant protection rules should apply, including the rent break where it applies. This could affect furnished temporary housing, business apartments, and landlords using short-term contracts to avoid regular rental protection. For tenants, this means more protection. But this change has its own risks. Some people genuinely need temporary housing. Expats, students, people on probation periods, people waiting for their long-term apartment, and people who just moved to Germany and are trying to survive Anmeldung, Schufa, and the deeply spiritual experience of being told the kitchen is not included. So the difficult question is this: can the reform stop abusive temporary contracts without making genuine temporary housing harder to find? That is probably where a lot of debate will happen. The next change is about utility bills and access to receipts. Operating costs or Betriebskosten are one of the most common sources of arguments between tenants and landlords. A German utility bill can look like a puzzle designed by an accountant who had too much coffee. Heating, water, garbage, insurance, caretaker, cleaning, and a bunch of other things. By the end of reading the document, you are not sure whether you owe 300 euros or accidentally bought a part of the building. The reform wants to strengthen transparency around documents and receipts, meaning simpler language and documentation. This matters because Betriebskosten statements are often disputed. Mistakes happen. Sometimes it is just sloppy paperwork, and sometimes the numbers are correct but explained so badly that even a patient person starts questioning reality. For tenants, this means more clarity. For landlords, it means clearer documentation. And for everyone, ideally fewer fights about whether the house Hausmeister really got that much more expensive. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know what you think about this video. Even a random emoji in the comments helps with engagement. Okay, the next change is with late rent payments. That simply means someone falls behind on rent. Under the current rules, there is something called Schonfristzahlung. In simpler terms, if a tenant gets a termination without notice because of unpaid rent, they can sometimes save the tenancy by paying the outstanding rent within a certain grace period. So far so good. But here is the problem. That protection does not work the same way for ordinary termination. So a tenant can pay the rent debt later and the termination without notice may be cancelled. But the ordinary termination can still remain. In practice, that means the tenant may still lose the apartment. And that has been a huge issue. The draft wants to change this. In the future, tenants who are terminated because of delayed rent payments should be able to cancel not only the termination without notice but also the ordinary termination by paying what they owe. In plain English, if you fall behind on rent but somehow manage to get the money together, you may have a better chance of keeping your apartment. But here I also understand why landlords are not exactly throwing confetti over this. Landlords are not banks. Some are big companies, yes, but many are private people with one or maybe two apartments. They may have a mortgage. They have house care, repairs, insurance, taxes, and maintenance. If the rent does not arrive, that can become a real problem for them too. So this point in the draft isn't a simple tenant good, landlord bad stories. For tenants, the change means more security. For landlords, it means less certainty when rent payments fail. So even if this part of the draft is approved, I would expect some blowback in terms of overall higher rents as a result. The next change is about rent indexes. The Mietspiegel or the rent index helps determine the local comparable rent. That affects whether a rent increase is allowed, whether a rent is too high, and how the rent break works in practice. The reform wants authorities to have better access to certain data, including property addresses from property tax authorities, so they can create and improve rent indexes. Here, better data can change real outcomes. If the rent index is more accurate, rent disputes may become clearer and tenants may have stronger evidence when a rent is too high. But there is a catch. Many landlords argue that official rent indexes often lag behind the real market, especially in cities where asking rents are exploding. So depending on where you stand, a stronger Mietspiegel can feel like more fairness or more restriction. And this is why the reform is politically sensitive. Rent law has to protect tenants because housing is not a luxury product. It is basic stability. But renting also has to remain predictable enough for private landlords. If too many owners decide that renting out property is not worth the risk, some may sell, stop investing, or avoid long-term rentals. That does not solve the housing shortage either. And this reform is much bigger than it may look at first. It is not just one small legal adjustment. For tenants, the direction is pretty clear. More protection, transparency, and fewer loopholes. For landlords, the picture is mixed. And again, nothing is final yet. The Bundestag and Bundesrat still have to deal with it, and the final law may look different. So what should you do now? If you are a tenant, check what kind of rental contract you have. Do you have an index rent? Is your apartment furnished? Is the contract temporary? Have you had any problems with utility bills? Have you received a modernization notice? Those details really matter. Let me know what you think about these proposed changes, or if you want to share any tips from your experience as a tenant in Germany. And if you are tired of being a tenant and finally want to buy your own house, in this video I share how to buy a house in Germany. And in this video I share how to invest your first €100 in Germany.